All right, chapter 18, An Almost Jolly Holiday. Morgan woke on Christmas morning to the smells of cinnamon, citrus, and wood smoke. A fire roared cheerfully in the hearth. Hanging on her headboard was a fat red stocking, overstuffed with treats. She tipped it upside down, and into her lap spilled a treasure of chocolate, clementines, and gingerbread, a shiny pink pomegranate, a knitted scarf that looked like a fox, a pair of red mittens, a gold and purple tin of pickled sugar plums, a small cloth-bound book called Finnegan's Fairy Tales, a deck of silver-backed cards, a wooden hairbrush with a ballerina painted on the handle. All this just for her. St. Nicholas had outdone himself. Morgan pulled on the soft woolen mittens and held them to her face, remembering how much less satisfying Christmases were in the past. The Crows were never big on gifts. Once long ago, she worked up the courage to ask Corvus if she might get a surprise at Christmas this year, and to her delight, he'd said yes. After weeks of anticipation, Morgan jumped out of bed on Christmas morning, excited to see what had been left overnight, and found an envelope at the foot of her bed. Inside was an itemized bill for every cent Corvus had spent that year paying reparations to the registry office for cursed children on her behalf. He hadn't lied, at least. It was a surprise. As Morgan worked the gold foil off a chocolate coin with her teeth, her bedroom door flew open and Jack strolled in carrying a piece of paper in one hand and his stocking in the other. "Jolly Christmas," Morgan said. She almost nodded. Now go back outside and knock, but decided she was too full of Christmas cheer to really mind. "Glad tidings of Yule to you." Jack dropped onto her bed, handed her the note, and made himself comfortable, pouring out the contents of his stocking in a pile. He picked out a gingerbread dog and tore its head off, except not entirely glad, because Uncle Jove's been called away. "On Christmas morning?" asked Morgan, reading the note. "Urgent business on Maui. Back in time for lunch. Take Mog sledding for me, Jay." "What's Maui?" Jack swallowed a mouthful of gingerbread. "One of the middle realms. Probably another explorer missed their scheduled gateway home. He always gets called in on Christmas Day to help some idiot. Ugh, here, you can have this." He handed Morgan the pomegranate from his stocking with a look of distaste, and she threw him a couple of her clementines in return. "You don't have to take me sledding." She bit into another chocolate and shrugged. "I don't even have a sled." "What do you think that is, a pony?" said Jack, nodding towards the fireplace. Morgan peered over the edge of her bed and saw a shiny green sled encircled with a gold ribbon. The tag said, "Jolly Christmas, Mog." "Wow," she breathed, quite overwhelmed. Never in her life had she had so many gifts. "Mine's red," said Jack, rolling his eye. "Thinks he's funny." Jupiter didn't make it back in time for lunch or supper. Instead, sending his apologies with a messenger, Morgan might have been disappointed by his absence, except she was far too busy having the greatest Christmas of her life. The day was marked by thick, swirling snowfall. Courtesy of the Yule Queen, Jack and Morgan spent the morning sledding down nearby Galway Hill over and over again and warring with the neighborhood children in an epic snowball fight. They trudged back to the Deucalion at midday, just in time for lunch in the formal dining room. Long tables groaned under the weight of glazed hams, smoked pheasants, and roast geese, dishes of fat green sprouts with bacon and chestnuts, golden roast potatoes, honeyed parsnips, boats of thick gravy, crumbly cheeses and braided breads, and bright red crab claws and glistening oysters on ice. Morgan and Jack were determined to try a bit of everything, except maybe the oysters, but they both gave up halfway through to lie down in the smoking parlor, peppermint smoke, to aid digestion, declaring that they'd never eat another bite of food as long as they lived. 15 minutes later, however, Jack was dutifully plowing through a heaped bowl of trifle and 2 mince pies, while Morgan demolished a fluffy white meringue with cream and blackberries. During Jack's third trip back to the dining room, while Morgan lay in a corner sofa and breathed in the soothing mint green vapors, she heard someone enter the parlor. "It's not that I don't trust him," said a man's voice. "He must know what he's doing. The lad's a genius." Morgan opened her eyes sleepily. She could just make out two figures through the thick waves of smoke rolling out of the walls. Elegant Dame Chandra dressed in flowering silks of red and green, and spry, snowy-haired Category Burns in his Christmas kilt. Too clever for his own good, Dame Chandra agreed. But he isn't immune to making mistakes, Riri. He's only human. Morgan wondered hazily if she should let them know they weren't alone. She was about to clear her throat when, "Why, Morgan," said Category. "Of all the candidates he might have chosen, why her? What's her knack?" "She's a dear girl. Oh, of course, grand wee thing, champion of a gal. But what makes Jupiter think she's Wondrous Society material?" "Oh, you know Jupiter," said Dame Chandra. "He's always taking on challenges nobody else will. He was the first to climb Mount Ridiculous, you remember? And he went blazing into that troll-infested realm that no one else in the League of Explorers would touch with a 100-foot pole." The concierge chuckled. "Aye, and look at this place. It was a wreck when he found it. He took it on as a hobby, and now it's the grandest hotel in Nevermore." His voice had a grave edge. "But you can't take on a child as a hobby." "No," said Dame Chandra. "At least he failed with the Deucalion. It wouldn't have mattered so much. You can't hurt a hotel." There was a pause. Morgan froze and held her breath, worried for a moment that they spotted her through the clouds of peppermint smoke. After some time, Category sighed heavily. "I know we should keep our noses out, Chandra, but I'm only worried about the poor wee thing. I think he's setting her up for a terrible disappointment." "It's worse than that," added Dame Chandra in an ominous voice. "If the stink finds out she's here illegally, think of what Jupiter risks. It's treason. He could go to prison, Category. His reputation, his career gone. And not only that, but the Deucalion," finished Category solemnly. "If he's not careful, he'll lose the Deucalion. And then where will we all go?" Morgan was unsurprised to find herself wandering the halls of the Hotel Deucalion in the middle of the night, trying to banish her stomachache and bad dreams. It was past midnight when she noticed that the door to Jupiter's office was ajar. She peeked inside. He sat in a leather armchair by the fire, and on the table beside him he was steaming a silver pot in two small painted glasses. He didn't even look up. "In you come, Mog." Jupiter poured the tea, mint, and swirling green leaves, and stirred a sugar cube into Morgan's glass. His eyes flicked to her face briefly as she took the chair opposite. She thought he looked tired. Another nightmare. It wasn't a question. "You're still worried about the show trial?" Morgan sipped her tea and said nothing. She was used to it by now, the way he always knew these things. Once again she dreamed of epic failure, but this time, instead of ending when the audience began to jeer and boo, the nightmare continued with a parade of vicious, slavering trolls filling the Trolliseum with clubs, presumably to beat Morgan to death and put her out of her misery. "The trial's next Saturday," she said pointedly, hoping it would prompt him to tell her at last what she was supposed to do and how she was supposed to perform. He sighed. "Stop worrying so much." "You keep saying that." "Everything will be fine." "You keep saying that too." "But it's true." "But I don't have a talent," she said, accidentally splashing tea down the front of her nightgown. "Why am I even doing these trials when I'll never get into the society? I can't ride a dragon or sing like an angel. I can't do anything." Morgan found that once she started naming her worries out loud, she couldn't stop. "What if the stink finds out I'm here illegally? He'll kick me out and put you in prison. They'll take the Deucalion away from you, your reputation, your career." Morgan's voice caught in her throat. "You can't risk all that just for me. What about that stuff? What about Jack? You can't look after him if you're in prison. And what about—" She faltered, losing her thread. Jupiter waited for her to continue, smiling politely behind his glass of mint tea. It infuriated Morgan even more. Was he even worried about whether she'd make it into society, or was he just something he was doing for fun? Was Morgan just his hobby? The thought made something swell up inside of her, like a cornered animal rearing back, preparing to force its way out of her rib cage. She put her glass down. It rattled on the tray. "I want to go home." The words were out of her mouth low and dark before she'd even thought of saying them. They hung heavily in the air. "Home?" "Back to Jack-o'-the-Flax," she clarified, though she knew Jupiter realized exactly what she meant. He had become very still. "I want to go back now, tonight. I want to tell my family I'm alive. I don't want to join the Wondrous Society, and I don't—" The words wouldn't come easily. They caught at every syllable. I don't want to live in the Hotel Deucalion anymore. Last bit wasn't true, but she thought it would be easier if Jupiter thought so too. Morgan loved the Deucalion. No matter how many rooms and hallways and floors it had, it would never be big enough to contain her growing dread of the show trial. Her worry felt like a monster, like the ghost that haunted the Deucalion's walls, seeping into her bones like winter, so that she could never really feel warm. She waited for Jupiter to speak. His face was impassive and so very still that she thought it might crack, like a porcelain mask. He stared into the fire for a long time. "Very well," he said finally. His voice was soft. "We'll leave at once."